Welcome back, pod people. My guest today is Greydon Clark, a writer-director who has been making independent films for decades in a wide variety of genres. Started out making independent sort of action, comedy, blaxploitation films like The Bad Bunch and Black Shampoo. He's made socially conscious films like Skinheads. He's made comedies like Wacko and Joysticks. He's made children's films like Star Games. He's made thrillers like Russian Holiday, crime dramas like Mad Dog Cole, and my personal favorite, the horror films like Without Warning and The Uninvited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It sounds like I did quite a lot. I'm tired just listening.
Yeah. So when I was watching, I read your autobiography and I did my best to seek out the movies and watch them along as I was reading them, which is why it took me so long to read it.
Okay, that's all right.
And so the thing that really struck me about your oeuvre is that, like I said, it's a huge number of different genres. And so I'm wondering, what is it like what differences are there when you're directing a children's film or a horror film or a blaxploitation film in these different genres, trying to get good performances out of your actors, trying to make the audience care about the characters. What things are different when making these different genre films?
Well, let me start by saying I actually made films in 5 different decades. And if you count my book, that was in the 6th decade. And my book is called On the Cheap, My Life in Low Budget Filmmaking. And that really kind of sums it up. I made all these films on the cheap. I had very, very low budgets.
Yeah.
And what
typically 500,000 or lower.
Oh, much lower usually. What I would do is I would come up with an idea, because I wrote almost all of those scripts myself. I would come up with an idea and I would think, would I want to go see that movie? And if I said yes, then I would kind of come up with a story to fit with the idea and sit down and pound out the script. Writing was always the most difficult. Well, I guess the most difficult really was getting the financing. But after getting the financing, then coming up with the idea and then putting it in a script. I never felt limited to one genre of films. Not that I'm comparing myself to the great filmmakers of the past, but most of those guys and ladies did various types of films. The one that comes to mind the most is Howard Hawks. I mean, he even did musicals, which I did a couple of musicals. I guess you could call them musicals. And he did comedies and he did adventure stuff. And not that I am anywhere near in his league, but he did a lot of different genres of film. And I never felt there was a difference in my directing for any particular genre of film. Obviously, if you're doing a horror film or a sci-fi horror film like Without Warning, there are certain necessities that are in the script, and I would follow the script because, again, usually I had written it. I would follow the script and make the best film I could possibly make, not thinking, oh, well, this is a sci-fi horror film. I have to do something completely different. It was just a natural flow that the story and script required, and I would try and fulfill it.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense. I was wondering if, because like I know that in Without Warning, there are characters who are more sympathetic and characters who are sort of less sympathetic. And I was wondering if I don't know if your approach to that would be different than in a movie like Angel's Revenge, where all of the protagonists are very sympathetic characters, like we care about them and we want them to win. Whereas in Without Warning, one of the guys is kind of goes off the deep end as the movie goes along.
Well,
And
that's Martin Landau's character, I assume you're talking about.
yeah,
And that was the first film I did with Marty. Uh, my very next film, The Return, I also put Martin Landau. But excuse me, to come back to Without Warning, Marty's character from the very start, I hope the audience thinks he's a little out there, and he becomes more and more and more obsessed as he gets involved with the story, and his character has certain motivations that come to light, and like you say, he does go off the deep end.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it definitely. His character goes off the deep end, and I found it interesting watching that and like feeling. When I was watching it, I made a really inaccurate prediction about how his character was going to go. I thought he was going to really, get his mind together and because he is basically correct in his paranoid suspicions, but instead it just sends him deeper and deeper into the paranoia. So it's a bit tragic but very entertaining.
Thank you. I think that maybe you're asking, is there really a difference in my directorial style between
Yes.
a comedy and a horror film? And
Yes.
I have to say, no, there isn't, because
Okay. All right.
it's the script that dictates. I mean, look, with a horror, excuse me, with a horror film, you may want to shoot a particular character and lower the camera angle to have him looming in the foreground and have a certain suspicion thrown upon him. Where in a comedy, you may want to shoot it directly on from the point of view of a person standing next to him versus from a lower angle that would make him look ominous or threatening in some way. And
Yeah.
I remember in Dance Macabre, I kept filming. I wanted to put suspicion on Robert Englund's woman that was taking care of him. And I wanted to put suspicion on her. So I kept lowering the camera to film her from a lower angle up. A lot of actresses would have complained. She didn't, because first of all, she was very attractive and you couldn't film her unattractively. But that may be a difference in positioning the camera in a certain way. And you may want to take a very wide shot to give the feeling that something's going on that the audience can't fully see. But in a general sense, I followed the script. The script dictated everything.
Yeah. Yeah. In my opinion, the height of, like, sort of the peak of your film career, the best run of movies you've got here is from 1980 to either 1987 or 89, because you've got The Return, which is sort of a sci-fi western, Without Warning, which is a sci-fi horror film, Wacko, which is a very early sort of meta horror comedy, and which I was really surprised by when I watched, because so I was expecting, a horror comedy. I've seen that sort of thing from that sort of era. What I wasn't expecting was for it to be so self-aware of the horror genre, because a lot of people who are only, mild to moderate horror fans really think that the self-aware horror film was invented by Scream in the 90s, when it really wasn't. And usually the film that I point to when people say that, and I say like, no, there's these other films that came out well earlier that were doing the same thing, is Friday the 13th Part 6, where they say like, oh, I've seen enough horror movies to know that, you see a guy in a scary mask, we should turn around and go the other way. But Wacko like opens with a guy in a horror mask saying everyone who has sex must die, which is very clearly a direct commentary on things like Friday the 13th. And so and yet before I watched it during this recent marathon of your films, I had never heard of it before, and I'm really surprised. It seems like it should have a more prominent place in the history of horror comedy.
Well,
So
let me interrupt and say I agree with you on that.
yeah, so I'm wondering, like, tell me a bit about how that one came about, and how, because like I said, it's this sort of meta film in that there is a lot of jokes in it that are references to earlier horror films, like the lawnmower comes out of the guy's chest, like in like the alien baby from Alien. So tell me a bit about how that came about.
Well, I love all types of films, and I decided in I guess it was after The Return. I decided, and I just done 2 sci-fi horror type films with Wacko and then The Return. I decided I wanted to do a comedy, and I wanted to do a spoof on horror films. Kind of the inspiration really was Airplane, and I wanted to have a joke
Oh, okay.
or a reference on every page of the script. If I went more than 1 page and did not have at least 1, and hopefully 3 or 4 jokes on the page, I rewrote the page. And I was very aware of really all kinds of films, but specifically horror films that I was trying to spoof. So I realized that a lot of people, especially maybe in today's world, won't recognize which film I'm spoofing, because it again, the film was made in 1980, so anything after that I couldn't spoof. So
Yeah.
yeah, right. So it's all the horror films that I spoofed were pre 1980, and a lot of them, when I look at the film now, Wacko is one of my favorite films. I hate to say this, I like all my films, because I realized the difficulty of getting the project financed, coming up with the idea, writing the script, producing it and directing it, and then doing the editorial on it. It's extremely difficult to make a movie. And I was very, very, very lucky in my whole career, because I directed 20 feature films plus a couple of television things, and it was all luck. What to me, what made a successful film was if it made enough money for me to do another film, because
Yeah.
that's what I was doing for a living. I had a family to support, and I was lucky to do well. In about 25 years, I directed 20 films. So that's luck to get the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about when I was reading your book On the Cheap, which again, it's available at greydonclark.com. Really entertaining book, really informative and good and well written.
Thank you.
Formatted like a script, which really surprised me when I received it.
Yeah. I'll tell you what happened on that. When I people often had asked me, "Oh, Greydon, you've done so many films, so many different genres. You have to write an autobiography." And I said, "Oh, Jesus, nobody gives a shit about some old director that directed films in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s." But then I started realizing I have 2 boys And I had them kind of late in life. I was in my early 40s before I had my first one. And so most of my work they were not familiar with. So they said, "Oh, Dad, write this, write the thing." So I sat down and started writing a traditional autobiography. And I would look up from my keyboard to the computer, and I had slipped into a screenplay format because I'd written so many screenplays that I just automatically went to it. And then I thought, well, maybe I should write this as a screenplay. So I formatted the entire thing as if a screenplay is sent to an actor and they read it and they see their lines in the middle with their character names and so on and so forth. And it is unusual. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. But the response has been really amazingly good. Online these days, everybody hates everything. But I have not gotten any negative response at all. Not now. Now, when your podcast plays, I'll probably get a bunch. But
No, I doubt that. I only interview people whose work that I actually enjoy, and the reach on this podcast is not very large. Yeah, really, I would say my only complaint about the book is that the shipping cost was a bit high. You could send it by media mail, get that down a little.
the post office keeps raising the prices.
That's true. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but everything is higher than it should be. I guess they call it inflation or whatever. But at any rate, it's filled with photos from each of my films. What I did is I separated each chapter for one film. So in effect, it's 20 different chapters. Plus, I have a chapter. I did a couple of television episodic Mike Hammers.
Yeah, Mike Hammer, Private Eye. That's one of the few things of yours that I have not seen.
I think all of my films are available somewhere. I think Mike Hammer is on. I want to say, I'm not sure. It could be Amazon or one of the streaming services.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. It's on Amazon. Hey, for free if you watch it with ads.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's about that's about what they paid me for free.
Yeah. So I want to come back to that in a moment. But the other thing, while we're on the subject of your book, the book that it reminded me the most of is How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime by Roger Corman.
Yes.
But I remember when I read Roger Corman's book, my thought was they should really drop the how from this title because there's very little explanation of how he does it. It's more just like a list of events.
Yes.
Whereas I found like you went into a lot of detail about like how you got funding and how you would put a lien on your house and you put the name of your banker in the book who was like, yeah, you sure, and it was interesting watching those character relationships develop over the decades where like at first they're really hesitant about it and then later they're like asking you if you're feeling hesitant about taking out another lien on your house.
Yeah, of course.
And it was really I found it more interesting and more informative than Roger Corman's book, despite being very similarly structured.
Well, let me say this about Roger Corman. I think he is undoubtedly one of the smartest persons I've ever met. And I had a couple of dealings with him. And a very charming, very nice, pleasant guy. And his work stands for itself. I mean, I did 20 films. He probably did 200 or more. But what I did to get back to the book for a second is on each of the films, I started with where did the story come from? Where was my thinking that I came up with this story? And then how did I write the script? And then how did I get the financing? And
Yeah.
like you say, many times I had a relationship with a bank, and many times I would go to the bank and I would say, okay, I need 200,000, 300,000, 50,000, whatever it was. And they would say, well, great, we can't just give you this. What if you don't make the picture? What if this happens or that happens?
Right.
And I would say, well, I need this money. And the first time, and this shocked me, the first time it was a lady, a woman banker. She said, well, you own a house, don't you? I said, yeah, myself and the bank, I own a house. Not her bank, but another bank, had a mortgage on the house, of course. She said,
Mhm.
well, would you be willing to sign a second mortgage on your house to get this money? I said, yes, I would, without question. She said, well, your wife's named Jackie, right? I said, yeah. She said, well, you know that she would have to also sign because the house is in both your names. I said, oh, okay. Well, I'm sure she will. Wondering, would she really do it the first time? And we had just had our first kid. So I went home. She wasn't there. I went home and I told her, listen, I can get the money to make the movie, but we have to sign a second mortgage on our house. She said, how does that work? I said, well, if the movie doesn't make money back, they're going to take the house. And again, she had a 1-year-old or less than 1-year-old child at the time. And she said, would you want to do it? I said, yes. She said, okay. And we went over to the bank and we signed the papers and I got the financing. And then I would go back again and again and again. And one time after I had done it 4 or 5 times, she said, here we go again.
Yeah, it seemed like a very successful rhythm that you got into there.
Well, luckily I was able to pay the bank back because
Yeah,
had I been able to pay the bank back, then of course I wouldn't have been able to do my next picture.
right. Yeah, so on the subject of doing your pictures like that and them being specifically your pictures, one thing that struck me as different from the way that you seem to do it, compared to a lot of other people that I've interviewed, um, unless I'm misunderstanding, it seemed like you put less emphasis on like retaining the rights to your films. It seemed like once you were finished with them, you were willing to sell those to distributors, and only occasionally really put a lot of effort into getting them back for yourself. Do you still have the rights to most of your films, or are those owned by some other corporation or something?
About 10 years ago, maybe, yeah, roughly 10 years ago, I had retained almost all of my films. I mean, look, I would sell Germany for 20 years or whatever, France, Spain,
Yeah.
Italy,
20 years. Wow, that's so
yeah,
long.
yeah, I know. But I stayed alive long enough to get those rights back. So about 10 years ago, I had probably 18 of my 20 films that I had retained rights to. And a company approached me, uh, basically a television company,
Okay.
and said, would I sell the rights? They actually asked for a couple of specific films. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. But I do have my library of films, again, about 18, I think it was, that I would sell as a package deal. So we negotiated for a few weeks and eventually I did sell them. So at this point in time, when you watch or buy a film, uh, I get very little, but I have no complaints. As I said, I was very happy with my career, and I don't know what I would have done had I not gotten into the film business. Because when I was born in a small town in Michigan, and I was a basketball player, and I had a scholarship to college, and then I hurt my hand in an accident working one summer at a factory, which that summer in the factory taught me one thing, and that is I didn't want to work at a factory. But so I was hurt, and I dropped out of college foolishly and said, what do I want to do with my life? And I always loved the movies. I mean, I would go, as I say, it was a small town in Michigan. They only had one movie theater. So they only showed really the major studio features. And I would, Hitchcock and Hawks and all the great directors. And I didn't even know what a director did. I knew this. It was the last credit before the movie started. So I thought, well, I see actors up there. Hell, I could do that. So I hopped in my car and I drove to California, not knowing a soul. Found a Fleabag hotel in Hollywood. Went into a bookstore in Hollywood the second day I was there, and I found a book called A Young Actor's Guide to Hollywood. So I bought the book, I read it, and in it basically said, if you want to learn how to be an actor, you have to take lessons. You got to get an acting teacher. And it listed a couple of them. I went to see one, and I became his student. In those days, I think it was $5 a lesson, which with the money I had was a hell of a lot. I mean, I was literally eating peanut butter and crackers for dinner. Because I didn't have any money. So anyhow, make a long story short, I met a bunch of people there at the acting class, one of which became my wife, Jacqueline Cole. And I met another girl there who asked me, would I act as a beard, as her boyfriend, because she was going back on an interview with the director. And the director was making passes at her, and she was not interested. So she said, I'm going to a final reading tomorrow. Would you come and act as my boyfriend? So I thought for about a half a second, did I want to, because I had not gotten an agent. I had not gotten anything. I had been there for almost 2 years. Actually, let me rephrase it, over 2 years. And so I thought for about a half a second, would I go with her to meet a director? So I did, and it was a guy named Al Adamson, who was quite prolific in his career, making very low budget pictures. And so I met him, and we were about to go. She introduced me, just by name and Greydon Clark and so on. So I think that he assumed I was her boyfriend, which is what she wanted. So right. As we were leaving, he got a telephone call, and I heard him say, yeah, I'm playing tonight. I'll see you there. So I said to him, oh, what do you play? Thinking he was going to say Jen Rummy or something. I don't know. And he said,
I was assuming a music thing.
Yeah, right. And he said, basketball. We play at the Y.
Oh.
And I was 6'1" and thin and looked like I might be a basketball player. He said, do you play? I said, yeah, I started in my year in college. He said, well, why don't you come join us? And I thought, I'm going directly to the Y right now, and I'll wait. If it's 8 o'clock at night, I'll be there. So anyhow, I started playing with him. We became friends. I eventually wrote a script for him, first script I'd ever written. And he made that picture, a picture called Satan's Sadist, which has some notoriety. And I got a part in it, a fairly good part. And as I say, I'd written it. And and I got in SAG because of that. And, eventually, and then I started writing more scripts. One of my first scripts my first script that was produced, I produced myself by getting a friend who gave me $10,000 $10,000 to make the whole movie. And I somehow did it. Everybody said, "Oh, you can't do that." I tried to get Al to direct it. Then I knew another director, a guy named David Hewitt. I tried to get him directed. And both of them said, "You can't make a picture for $10,000. Are you crazy?" A real low budget picture then was about 50 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, well, God damn it, I'm going to make this movie. I'll direct it myself. I haven't only been on three sets entirely prior to that. And it was just ego run amok. So
Something
anyhow,
that seems a little required in order to make this sort of thing.
right. So anyhow, I made that picture. I was happy with it. It was about a guy played by me who came back from Vietnam, was opposed to the war, and had trouble integrating with his family after he had been wounded in Vietnam. So I made the picture. I liked the picture, but I could not get a distributor. Finally, I got a distributor who had never distributed anything before. But luckily, I don't know why I knew this. Luckily, I put in the contract that if he had not paid me, I think it was $25,000, within 1 year, I would get the rights to the picture back, and I could find another distributor. So I've always been a very liberal, politically person.
Yeah.
And one of my proudest moments is I was in a parade for Martin Luther King in 1963, before I went to Hollywood in 1965, for Martin Luther King in South Bend, Indiana, where I was selling cars at the time. Anyhow, but I was always politically aware. So I decided to make a picture called The Bad Bunch, about relations between a young black man living in Watts and myself, a young upper middle class white guy living in not Bel Air, but in a fine section in the valley. So I made that picture, and it was a major success. I mean, I doubled or tripled my money. And then I took that money, and I had relationships with distributors around the country. And because The Bad Bunch was a big hit for them, they said, great, you have to do another black film. I said, a black director should direct black films. I'm not going to do it. Well, we'll give you money if you do it. Well, obviously, I needed money to make another picture. and I did Black Shampoo. And Warren Beatty had a picture out or coming out called Shampoo. And I thought, well, I'll ride on his tailwinds and do Black Shampoo. So I announced that I was going to do it. I started production, and Army Archer, who was a columnist in Daily Variety, called Warren Beatty and said, what do you think of this character making Black Shampoo? And Beatty said, well, I don't know. What are they going to do? Make Black Gone with the Wind next? Ha ha ha. So then Army Archer called me and said,
man, out of all of the films to think of a black version of them, Gone with the Wind would be.
That was my response immediately. Army Archer called me and said, great, do you have a comment on Mr. Beatty saying, what are they going to do? Make Black Gone with the Wind? I said, that's a great idea. I'd love to see the Civil War told from the point of view of a black character. I may do that next. Of course, I did. But Black Shampoo, I was very pleased it made money. So I started on my routine. If picture A makes money, I can do B, C, etc. However, I had to be damn certain that each one of them made money, or I would have been on the street with a sign saying, I will direct for food. But anyhow, so that started. Black Shampoo made money. Then I did Satan's Cheerleaders, which made money. High Rider. on to 25 years.
Yeah. Oh man, so many different films and so
Sorry,
many years.
did I overwhelm you? I'm sorry.
Oh, I just I'm trying to remember what all the questions are that I have because
That's all
I have
right.
so many of them and I haven't been writing them down, which I probably should be. But
I'll tell you.
okay,
About halfway through my career, I had a huge hit in a picture called Joystick.
yes,
I had a,
a very funny sort of sexy comedy
thank you.
about
Yeah,
video games.
yes. At the time, there were about 20,000 video game stores where they would go in, kids would go in, put their quarter in the machine and play, and then another quarter. So I got the idea. My picture Wacko, the comedy spoof of horror films.
Yeah,
I did a test screening in San Antonio, Texas. Wonderful, wonderful results. The audience loved it. And it was more than a screening. I opened it for a week there to see what the box office would be. The box office was very good, but I went down to see what was happening with the audience. And when I was waiting in the movie theater, I was standing there in the lobby and I looked over to one corner and there was a line of about 15 young men standing there. And I thought, what the hell, are they giving free popcorn away? I want some of that. So I walked over and they were standing in line to play a video game. There was 3 games, 3 lines. And they would stand in line, and when a guy would lose, he would go to the end of the line, and the next guy would put his quarter. So I looked at that and I thought, wow, there's a movie there. This is an idea. I can make a movie about video games. So I went back to Los Angeles and I started looking at video game stores. And as I said, there was about 20,000 of them across the United States, and there was a number of them in the greater Los Angeles area. And I went to 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And there was an article in the LA Times talking about a woman, a mother actually, trying to prevent her son from playing video games because she thought they were a bad influence on him. And I said, that's my movie. I can have, I'll create a gang, not a gang, a group of nice young people playing video games in a video arcade, and the parents are opposed to it and try to shut the video arcade down. So I wrote the script. I wanted it to be sexy. I wanted it to be funny. And the bad guy was the father trying to shut it down. Anyhow, so I made the picture. I went to a number of arcades saying, give me permission to film here. They said, you got to be joking. I can't shut my place down because I'm making thousands of dollars a week and I couldn't afford to pay them to shut it down. Plus, they would lose their customers to the next video arcade down the street. So I realized I had to build a set. Usually I did not build set. Usually I shoot on practical locations. So what I did is I went to video arcades and I asked them to get permission to film there. Excuse me, get permission to film there. And they turned me down flat. They weren't going to close their place of business and lose their customers to the next arcade down the street. So I had to build a set for the video arcade, which I did. I found an inexpensive soundstage, built the set, and made the movie. So the distributor of Wacko was a guy in Salt Lake City. And I told him about the idea before I started filming. I told him about my idea to make joysticks. He was all for it. So we made a deal, so on and so forth. I made the picture. He released the picture. The weekend that we released, we were the #1 picture in the whole United States.
That's incredible.
It was incredible. It was a huge hit. I remember he called me on the Monday after the weekend opening, and he said, "Greydon, you're a millionaire." I said, "Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much." Well, I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me because I've had a tremendous career, very lucky in all aspects. The guy went bankrupt and never paid me a penny.
Oh,
There should be
yeah.
there should be a musical note there, ba 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 bum. But so that was a difficult pill to swallow. But a couple of years later, a foreign distributor that I had used before contacted me and said, "Greydon, I have a company in Malta. They want to make a movie. Can you make a movie in Malta?" I said, "Malta? I don't know anything about them. They have birds, right? The Maltese falcon." And so I said, "I can make a picture anywhere." So this was before the internet, believe it or not. So I guess I went to the library. You have to explain to your audience what a library is. I went to the library and I looked up Malta and I found it was a little island off the coast of Italy, and they did have a film studio there. So myself and the foreign distributor, a guy named Lou George, got on a plane, went to Malta. He introduced me to the film studio there, and I looked at the locations. And I came back, and Joe Don Baker had become a friend of mine. He was in Wacko, and he was in Joysticks. And I contacted Joe Don, and I said, "Joe Don, you know that I had a terrible experience with Joysticks. Great film, great response, but I didn't get any money. So I'm going to Malta. I can't pay you what I paid you on those other two pictures, but I'll give you," I think I gave him 50 grand cash and a percentage of the box office or percentage of my end.
Right.
So I went back to the bank and said, "I'm going to go to Malta to make a picture. I think I needed 100,000, 125 or something." And they were a little bit more reluctant than usual because here I was going overseas. But they had the house as the backup, and we signed again. Off we
House
went.
isn't going overseas.
That's right. So I went over there and I made a picture called Final Justice. And I wrote it specifically for Joe Don Baker. He played a Texas sheriff who gets involved in an extradition case. And I filmed the whole thing in Malta, although the Texas sheriff part was supposed to be in Texas.
Right.
Anyhow, so he gets on a plane taking a bad guy, a mafiosa, to Italy. And the mafiosa crew does something to the plane to make it land in Malta. He gets away. There's a chase. Eventually, guess what? The good guy triumphs. And so we made that picture, and we did quite well. Not anywhere near Joysticks, but we did that, and then I did Uninvited. Uninvited is an interesting story. In Malta, the reason the studio exists, they have a huge tank the size of approximately 2 football fields, and it's 4 feet deep, and it's on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean. So when you film, you can film a big ship, and it's only 4 feet, so you have platforms for the lights and the camera and what have you, but you film it in a way that the perspective is the Mediterranean Ocean. You don't realize that you're in a tank. So that was great. I thought, I know, I'll write a script taking advantage of that tank, and I'll go back to Malta and make it. So I wrote the script, Uninvited. Young people get a cat who has been experimented on by some evil people trying to make it, trying to use it as a military weapon. And a cat, a normal, regular house cat. And the cat escapes. Our young people pick it up, and they get invited on this huge, beautiful boat ship, and they go out to sea. So I get the script. I have to go to Malta to confirm availability and so forth. I get there, and I realize, or didn't realize while I was doing it, that I had written this film with a huge ship. It couldn't just be a little yacht or something, because a cat escapes and runs throughout the ship killing people. All right. So I get there, and and the people were the crew, the film crew, were very good, hardworking, pleasant people. I get there and I cannot find a big cruising ship that I can put in the tank, or if necessary, go out in the Mediterranean and film.
Yeah.
It just was not available. I mean, they had a lot of huge luxury ships, but they said to me, Greydon, that's a $10 million ship. We can't get that for you to film for 3 weeks. Okay, so I get on a plane. I go back to Los Angeles, depressed as hell, because here I had worked months on the script. I had what I thought was a pretty good script, and I wanted to make it, but what can I do? So I'm complaining to Jackie about how terrible it was in Malta. And she said, well, why don't you go down to the marina, find a ship there? So I did. I went down to the marina, but they were all very nice, some luxury things, but they were like yachts. They were, not anywhere near big enough. And I said to a guard at the marina, I said, I want to make a movie, but I need a big, big ship. He said, well, there aren't any big ships at the marina. You need to go down to San Pedro, which is where the huge ships from overseas with stuff coming in, imports coming in. So I hopped in my car and went down to San Pedro, and those were too big, and they weren't luxury yachts. So I said to the guard there, a different guard, of course, I said, I need a luxury yacht that I can film on. He said, well, these are tankers. He said, wait a minute, there is one. And he gave me the directions to it. So I've walked around these gigantic import ships. And I turned a corner, and there it was. There it was, a beautiful, beautiful ship, big enough to make my film work. And I looked up and I said, my God, I think I see the ghost of Aristotle and that's standing up. It was perfect. So I got a hold of the owner, and he said, well, I'm selling this ship, and I've got a buyer, and he's in Seattle. And in 3 weeks, I think he said a month, in a month, I am taking this ship and sailing it up to Seattle for delivery. And I said, well, look, I can start quick, and I need 3 weeks of filming on your ship. He said, well, how far do you have to go? I said, look, we just have to go out to the ocean far enough so that when we turn around, we don't see land. He said, oh, well, that's okay. What kind of a crew would you need? I said, I have no idea. What kind of a crew would I need? He said, well, I got the captain, and it's I could get by with 2 or 3 additional crew members. So we made a deal. I've forgotten the numbers now. I'm going to guess $5,000 for him to supply his captain, because we didn't have a captain, of course. Right. We had an actor playing the captain.
But that's different.
So anyhow, I made that movie, and luckily it was successful. And then I got the idea. Again, I was always very political. I got the idea to do Skinheads. And I made that, and it was successful. And then I made a picture called Sight Unseen, again successful. And then I met Menachem Golan. Now, I don't know about your audience if that'll ring a bell.
Oh
but he,
yeah, he's one half of Canon Films.
oh yeah, right. And he was one of the most prolific producers and directors uh, in that era. I mean, his Canon Films had hundreds of pictures that they made. I mean, people always said, "How does he do it?" Well, he doesn't direct most of them. He hires
Right.
people to do
He's a
it.
producer.
Right. So
Well, wait, but before we go too far into that, I have some questions about Uninvited, because Uninvited was the first of your movies that I saw,
uh,
and I think it's still my favorite of them. Though, like Wacko and Joysticks are up there, but Uninvited is, I mean, horror is my favorite genre, and
yeah,
Uninvited is really creative and really interesting. Um, and so I was wondring, like you said, in Uninvited, the killer is this like cat that's been experimented on.
right.
And but it's much stranger than that, because it's not just a house cat that kills people. It's a house cat that sort of transforms and then kills people.
Yes.
And there's a cat inside of the cat that comes out. And so I was wondering if you could talk about how that prop was made, and about how, like, what motivated it. Because I have
Yeah.
some guesses, but I'm curious if they're accurate or not.
Well, when I first wrote the script, it was a rat, not a cat.
Oh,
And
okay.
I always gave my scripts to Jackie and had her read them and then get her opinion on them. And she said, I like the script, but I hate rats. I don't want to see a movie about a rat. And I said, what about Willard? She said, that was an exception. So by that time, I was using Word computer. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just go in there and change rat to cat. I don't even have to reformat because it's 3 letters. So I made it a cat. And then I thought, well, a cat, how can I make the cat evil? Because cats are sweet little pussy cats. And I thought, well, let's see. He's being worked on by a malevolent source of some type, and they
Right.
have injected him, and there's a creature inside the cat. And when the cat is irritated, the creature actually comes out of the cat's mouth and does its villainous deeds, kills the various people. Excuse me. So, okay, how the hell do I do that? How do I film the monster smaller cat coming out of the larger regular, I think they're called tabbies, regular house cat?
Yeah.
So I go to my animal trainer who I'd used in previous stuff, and I said, you have cats. Oh yeah, we have cats. He said, but Greydon, you should be aware, a cat is almost untrainable. A dog, we can put a piece of food someplace, blow a whistle or snap our fingers. The dog will run to the spot and stop. A cat, you do that, he's going to run right past it. So, it's going to be difficult. And I said, well, I'll make it work. So then I thought, how the hell do I show this monster cat coming out of the other cat? So I did some research, and I found a man and wife living in the area who created puppets for films. So I contacted them and I said, I want you to make a head of a cat, big enough, maybe 3 feet wide and a proportionate tall, that I can open its mouth, or better yet, you as the puppeteer can open its mouth, and out from it comes this evil, smaller creature. Oh, yeah, we can do that. So I hired them. I gave them photographs of the cat we were going to use, and they created a puppet cat, again, about 3 foot wide and proportionately tall, and had its mouth be able to open. And then I went to my monster guy and explained to him what I wanted him to make. So, and it was a hand puppet basically. And so when I filmed, I had the monster guy usually laying on the ground in a way so I couldn't see him, of course. And the puppeteer people lying off camera. And I would have them open the cat's mouth, and the monster guy would push out this creature. And it looked terrible. I mean, it looked very frightening. Where the sweet tabby cat was just the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So, and I think it works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very surprising and very entertaining, and a lot of great kills in there. I remembered one of the questions I wanted to ask you earlier. You were talking about a $10,000 budget for your first film. That would have been Mothers, Fathers, and Lovers, right?
Yes. Yes.
How much of that money went to things like film stock and the processing in the lab and things like that?
You know, when I was told you can't make a picture for $10,000, I knew they were right. So I had to go to everybody that I could think of and make deals with it. So I went to a lab and I said, I need a deferment on the payment. They said, well, great. We don't know you, because I'd never done a picture.
Right.
We don't know you. How do we know that? And I said to them, but you keep the negative, so you're protected. They said, we're not protected. What if you don't finish the picture? I said, what do you mean? I'm going to finish the picture. How do we know that? And I said, I'm telling you, I'm going to finish the picture. So the guy kind of liked me, liked my brazen attitude, I guess. He said, all right. And incidentally, I was only shooting about a 2-to-1 ratio. The average film, round figures, 10,000 feet. I was shooting 20,000, which means I couldn't have a lot of coverage. I couldn't do various takes. I had to make it good on one take.
Well, wait a second. You just said that the average film is 10,000 feet and yours was 20,000.
No, my raw stock, I'm sorry. My raw stock was 20,000. The actual finished film is 10,000, let's say.
Okay.
So, but a real movie that is really shot at a studio, they'll shoot 300,000 or 400,000 feet of film.
Wow.
To get the 10,000 that they need. So I said to the guy at the lab, look, I'm only going to shoot 20,000. Oh, 20, is that all you're going to need? Yeah. So I made a deal with him. Then I needed to get equipment, cameras, lights, etc. So I went to a guy. When I was working for Al Adamson, I was the gopher, among other things. So something needed to be returned to a laboratory place or an equipment place. I'd be the guy that would return it, or picked up, I'd pick it up. So, but I got to know the owner of a small equipment studio. So I went to him and I said, I was only shooting for 2 weeks. The whole film took 2 weeks. I said, I've got to get some equipment. Oh, okay, well, we've got this and that. And I said, how much would you charge me? And it was about $5,000 for the equipment. And I thought, oh, Jesus, that's half my budget. So I said to him, I can't do that. I got to do something else. He said, well, I have some old equipment back in my storage room. Come back there with me. So we went back and he had old lights, the great big, huge lights. And he had a dolly that was falling apart and so on. He said, you take anything from that top shelf, you're going to need it for 2 weeks? I said, yeah. He said, I'll give it to you for $1,000. So I said, deal. So I took all this old equipment and somehow made it work. And that's how I got the equipment. And for the people, I had got to know the crew on the Adams film that I was an actor in and had written the script. So I went to them and I said, listen, it's my first film. I'm going to direct. Would you work for, and I quoted a price, 10% of what they were getting. And they were nice enough to say, yeah, okay, 2 weeks, we'll do it. So where a guy was making from Adamson $2,000 a week, I paid him $200 for the 2 weeks. And they agreed to do it. So again, I was very lucky to have the support of that crew.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that that is really interesting to me, thinking about how filmmaking, and especially independent filmmaking, has changed over the decades, and is something I'd really like to hear your perspective on, because nowadays, with everything being shot on digital,
Right?
with some exceptions, of course, but primarily, especially independent films,
Yes.
um, the the huge expense and difficulty of shooting on film, and developing on film, and needing to keep track of the negative, and needing to worry about how many copies, and is this a copy of the copy, or is it a copy directly from the original negative, etc. None of that is a concern anymore. And so uh, it's really interesting to me to look at these budgets of these old films and see how much of the budget went towards that sort of aspect of post production, and nowadays, with that gone entirely, you can see films that have, like, that are both independent low budget films made decades apart, uh, with the same number of dollars spent on them, and and naively, I think a lot of people would assume, oh well, this was made for 10,000 or 100,000 or 500,000 or whatever, but it was made in the 70s, or it was made in the 80s, and so nowadays that budget would be, the equivalent would be much larger because of inflation. But such a huge percentage of it went to things that you don't need to spend money on anymore. And so really, a budget of, $100,000 in the mid 80s actually is kind of similar to a budget of $100,000 nowadays, just because so many things have changed. And so I'm wondering, like, what sort of things have you really noticed over the decades that you were making films? What were the practicalities of production that changed a whole lot, and what things remained the same?
You are absolutely correct. In fact, all of my films I shot on film, and therefore I had to buy the raw stock. I had to get it developed at the lab. I had to then edit almost all. The last two or three I edited digitally. But prior to that, all the editing was on film. Uh, and it was extremely expensive. It took a huge portion of our budget. I mean, 50% often would go to
Yeah.
those things that you had no control over. Today, you take your iPhone and you can go film anywhere, any place. And the cameras that I used on almost all of my films were huge and weighty and difficult to move. And you would have to stop every 10 minutes and reload the film into the camera. And I often thought, I'm spending at least an hour a day just reloading the film. Is there any way I could not do that? Well, no, there wasn't, because I had to shoot on film. But today, uh, if you want to change your iPhone, it takes 30 seconds. So, there's been a huge, huge change. And today, almost anybody can get a hold of an iPhone and go out and make a movie. And that's good, but you have to remember, you have to get people to see it. So
That's
you
true.
still need that distribution, but it was completely different in my day.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things that I've really noticed. I first really started paying attention to it when I was reading Roger Corman's autobiography that I mentioned earlier, that it seems like it's much easier to produce a film now than it used to be, but it's much more difficult to get it in front of a lot of people's faces. That it used to be that once you had made a movie, then it was much easier to get it into distribution. Whereas nowadays, at least the impression that I get is that making the movie is much easier, but then it is much more difficult to get it into distribution, or a lot of people distribute things themselves these days. And so uh, if you do that, yeah, you'll get it in front of some people, but you'll get it in front of a small fraction of the number of people that used to be there for any film.
Well, it's absolutely true that it's much, much easier to make a film today than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago when I was making it. And it's technologically easier because the technological improvements have been such. However, it was not easy to get a distributor back in my day also because what happened to the film industry is when I started making films, your movies played in theaters. That was where you made your money. There wasn't any video cassettes.
Right.
There wasn't and the exploitation films that I were making, excuse me, were not shown on television. So you had basically one shot. That's to get it in a movie theater. Well, to get it in a movie theater was very expensive because the print that would be shown at the theater was $1,500 to $2,000. So you had, and to make your picture have any meaning, you had to have at least 50 prints. So you had $75,000 that somebody had to come up with, or make a deal with the lab, come up with and get those prints. And then you had to ship them all over the country. And the shipping costs, because the prints basically were in two heavy metal cases. It was a five reels to show your picture. And to ship them was extremely expensive. Then you had to advertise the picture in the local newspaper and radio, and if you were fortunate enough, on local television. And so it was very complex, very expensive, and very difficult. Today, you can shoot on digital. I keep saying, excuse me, iPhone, but there are a lot of different digital processes that you can use.
I shot my most recent short film on my cell phone, but that's not what I'm going to be, probably not what I'm going to be using when I'm trying to make like a feature that will hopefully play in front of larger audiences.
You know, there are recognized and respectable directors who do a lot on digital, on
absolutely,
cell phone type stuff. So today you can also edit digitally. Which I did in my last 3 or 4 films. I edited digitally, which was terrific. It was quicker, cheaper, and I think better because you can, if you're editing digitally, you can try certain stuff and go back and re-edit easier than you can if it's film. If it's film, you have basically tape, Scotch tape in effect, putting 2 shots together. But then if you want to change it, say you want to add 1 or 2 frames, oh God, you got to go back. You got to find those 2 frames.
Oh God.
Re-splice it with Scotch tape. And then, so progress. Now, I hope this doesn't affect too many of your listeners who I assume many are have desire.
You said you hope this doesn't affect too many of my listeners.
Because I assume a lot of them have desire to make their own film, and that's good.
Yeah.
I applaud that. But there are a lot of films being made today because of the technological availabilities that were not able to be made X number of years ago. Because when I was making it, I would guess there were 3 or 4 independent filmmakers like myself in all of Hollywood, because you had to raise a lot of money, at least for me, a lot. And you had to go through the labs and the equipment and all the stuff. And therefore, look, my first film I made in 2 weeks. The Bad Bunch, which was a conglomeration from my first film. I took about 30 minutes from my first film, Mother's Father Lovers, shot a new 60 minutes and integrated the old footage with the new footage. I had 1 week to make a 60 minutes. And, you
That's
actors, you
not a
say
lot
to
of
the actors,
time.
look, it's not a lot of time. And you say to the actors, don't pick your nose, because if you do, it's going to be in film. I can't take two on you. So everything that you do, I'll do my best to make it good, but we're on a very tight schedule, 1 week, and I have very limited film. So here we go. So when a
Right.
person looks at that film, and this is not an excuse for the film, because I don't feel any of my films need to be excused, but when a person looks at the film, they may think some of the acting is less than superb or whatever, but you're looking at one take. You
Right.
know, I mean, many times I would think, oh my God, I got to take another. And then I would look at my watch, which I never wear a watch in today's world because I watch so many times on my watch, the seconds ticking away. So I would say, let's move on. We'll cover it from another angle. Or I would do something from a very simple camera setup, and I would think, boy, would I like to move the camera. Forget it. Let's go on, because you were on a time, limit.
Right. So what? How does that connect to my audience of potential filmmakers? What were you saying there?
Well, I guess what I said is there's so many films being made today. It's
Yes.
harder than ever to get distribution. I mean,
Yes.
somebody said to me, Greydon, if we gave you $1 million today, what would you do? And I said, put it in my pocket. Thank you very much. But I would first go and I would try
You've cut out
and
again.
get distribution set up. I would go to Netflix or one of those other streaming services. Hopefully, I would have a script that they would like, and I would get a commitment to have it play on their system, and
Yeah.
I would commitment to get back more money than I spent on the picture. But I would very reluctantly make a picture without having distribution set up, some
Yeah.
sort of distribution.
So, are you familiar with the streaming platform Tubi?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, a lot of the people that I interview are, currently active filmmakers
Yeah.
who do their own distribution. And so nowadays there are tools like Film Hub. Have you heard of that? Are you familiar with that?
Well, I've heard of them. I'm not that familiar with using them, because how does the producer get his money back?
Right. So the way that works nowadays with Film Hub is they're sort of like a distributor, but whereas a traditional distributor, because they had a whole lot of upfront expenses that you mentioned earlier, like making multiple prints of it and everything, the traditional distributors would filter out films both based on technical quality and based on artistic quality. Whereas nowadays, with Film Hub, they filter films based on technical quality, but they do not filter based on artistic quality. If your film like visually fits the right specs and everything, then they will accept it. And so the way that they make their money back, or the way that they make money, because they don't have to make their money back, there's no initial expenses for them, is that they pitch to different streaming networks, including ones like Tubi, which will accept most films, but also pitch to a lot of smaller foreign ones. And then whenever the movie streams on those streaming services, Film Hub gets some amount of money, and then they send, I think it's 70 cents on the dollar to the producer who uploaded the film in the first place.
Right.
And then the different streaming services make money in different ways. Some of them charge subscriptions, some of them show ads, some of them do both. Some of them,
Right.
charge you per watch of the film. And so nowadays, I think it is easier to get a distribution deal in that sense, where it ends up on a platform where people can watch it, but Film Hub won't do any advertising for you. If you want there to be any sort of ads or publicity or anything, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how comparing sort of the cycle of people that are making things nowadays, low budget independent films, and the sort of cycle that you were going through, where like you would mortgage your house and raise some other money, make the film, sell it to distributors, get your money back immediately from the distributors, and then assuming that they didn't rip you off, and then you would pay back your investors, and then you would do it again. Whereas nowadays it seems like it's more of a long tail sort of thing. People don't get their money back immediately, or at least independent filmmakers who follow this method, which isn't everybody, but it is a lot of them. And instead there's like a trickle of money that comes in over years, because you get paid as people watch it. And I watched a bunch of your movies on Tubi, and I imagine that's how those people who paid for who purchased the rights from you, that's how they're getting paid.
Right.
And so it's interesting that like nowadays I'll talk with somebody who's, they've made, 5 movies in the past 5 years, and the first movie is just now breaking even, and the second movie will break even in a year or two, and etc. But like maybe their third movie suddenly became really popular, and their third movie's made more money than the rest of them put together, and things like that. So that's really interesting to me, thinking about how distribution has changed. And I see a lot of advantages to the old method. But I think the biggest drawback that I've heard about, that you experienced more than once, I believe, is that they just never pay you. Yeah. You get this contract with how things are supposed to work out, and then they just never pay you. And it's amazing to me that they could get away with this. It seems like such a clear-cut case that, like, I mean, I guess if they go bankrupt, that makes sense, sort of. But still, there was another instance. I can't remember the person's name, but there was a person that you who just ripped you off, and then you had to go back into business with them, but you came up with this clever contract where if you paid them back 110% of their investment, you got all of the rights back, and they didn't get to distribute it.
Yeah, that was on Uninvited.
Yeah,
there was a guy who ripped me off, just blatantly took money that belonged to me on without warning, and I sued him, and ended up paying $70,000 to my attorney, because the suit took years, 2 years at least, was resolved, and I ended up getting $70,000 from the guy. So I didn't get any of the money that I was supposed to get. But the laws in this country protect banks and big companies, not the small guy. So I needed $100,000 to add to what I had for Uninvited, and I went back to this bastard that stole from me, and he wanted to give me the 100,000 and control the distribution. And I knew if I did that, I'd never get anything other than the $100,000. I wouldn't get any more. So I made a deal with him. Okay, I'll take your $100,000. I'll give you the distribution, but if I pay you back 110%, which would have been 110,000, if I pay you back within 6 months, you're out. Well, he never thought I could do it. but I did, and I got rid of him. And he was a, a very, very bad guy. He stole money from a lot of people, not only me, but a lot of people that I had the feeling were the bent noses and bent ears guys. And he skipped town about
Bent noses and bent ears. What does that mean?
mafia.
Oh,
Yeah,
like broken noses. Okay.
yeah. And he had taken money from them, stole it, and he skipped town in the middle of the night and literally disappeared. And I
Wow.
don't know if he was ever caught or if he got away with it, but he was gone. He had a son and a daughter, and they didn't know where he was. And anyhow, bad guy.
Jeez.
So yeah. So Thomas, you're right. The distribution has changed, and I feel for the guys that put up their houses and everything else to get the money to make their pictures today. But I hope they're getting a return on that investment because, as I said, to me, a successful picture meant I got enough money from that picture to go on to the next picture.
Yeah, I think that's still a very common way of looking at it,
Yeah.
which is good. Um, yeah.
Okay, I'll pick up in a place that you may like. I I had done, I think, I don't know, 12 or 13 pictures. And people kind of knew me, A lot of them probably thought he's a low budget asshole, but anyhow, I got a chance to meet Menachem Golan. Menachem was a prolific producer at Canon Films.
Right.
And uh, he he had a partner, was his cousin, but actually they were raised as brothers. Yoram Globus, Golan Globus was their real company, although
Right.
Canon was the name of the company. So they had a fight, and they hated one another.
Here,
Okay, so I met. Okay, so I had a reputation of being a low budget, very fast director, and I met Menachem Golan. Menachem had separated from his partner at Canon Films and started his own company, 21st Century Films. And he had the rights to a song, a very hit song. In fact, it was doing better at the time than even the Beatles. And it was Lambada. So he he contacted me, or I met him. Not exactly sure how he knew of me, but anyhow. So I went to his office, and he said that his former partner he was also going to produce a Lambada movie, and Menachem had the rights to the song, so he wanted to do Lambada, and he said, "We have to beat my cousin." I said, "Okay, what's the script?" He said, "What do you mean script? There's no script. We just have to make a movie about Lambada." He said, "There's a person in South America who comes to America and does the Lambada." I said, "That's your whole story?" He said, "Yep." So I said, "Okay, well, uh, give me a couple of days. Let me think about it, and I'll come back with the story." Okay. So I left, and I went back to him a couple of days later, and it's the first time I had met Menachem. I didn't know anything about him other than he was a prolific filmmaker. And I would guess he was probably in his mid-50s at the time. So, as I said, I was always a political person, and I was aware of the rainforest being destroyed by big business coming and actually burning the rainforest. So I said to him, "Okay, here's the story. there's a princess in Brazil whose family's living area is being burned by the big corporations, and she comes to America to save her homeland. He said, yeah. Does she speak English? I said, oh, yeah, of course. She was raised by the missionaries because nobody wants to do a film that you have to subtitle. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So he said, so what happened? She comes to America. I said, well, she wants to get on American television and tell the story of what's happening in Brazil to the rainforest. How does she do that? Well, there's a dance contest, kind of like a Dick Clark dance contest. She wants to get on that and talk about the rainforest. Okay, so what happens? I said, well, she has no money. She comes to Brazil and she's a princess, so she has a bodyguard with her. And he says, what does she do? I said, well, she gets a job, and he interrupts. He says, I know, as a maid in Beverly Hills. I said, yes, that's a great idea, Manaka. So by this time, I'm standing up. We're in his conference room, and I'm walking around because I have a tendency to think better on my feet. So I said, and there's a young dancer, a young man who lives in the house that she's a servant at, and they fall in love. So it's Romeo and Juliet. It's the rich young white guy and the Brazilian princess, and they fall in love, and they get together and they make it to the dance contest, and she gets to tell her story to Dick Clark and his people. So he said, great, do it. So I had a friend who had actually, the friend had introduced me to Manaka, and he had a couple of writers that he wanted to hire to do the picture, to write the picture. And I said, okay, we'll do it. Excuse me. We made the deal with Manaka, and Manaka. Now this was in December, late December, and he said, okay, we have to start shooting and we have to have it completed by March. I said, completed by March? Manaka, we haven't cast it. We don't really have a script. He said, Greydon, you told me you were a fast director, so be fast. The script was written, and Menachem liked the script. Luckily, he was also politically aware person, and he wanted to make something that had a message to it. Now, come on, it's a low budget exploitation dance movie, but it has a message. Anyhow, so we got the script, and I said, Menachem, he said, Greydon, you have to make this in 18 days. I said, Menachem, there are 18 separate identifiable dance numbers. And everybody says to me, Greydon, you got to take at least a day on each dance number. And I said, if I do that, we won't have a movie. We won't have any other time. He said, Greydon, you told me you were fast. So I started shooting, and 18 days later, we had the movie. Now, I had a close friend who was my longtime editor, Earl Watson. And I said to Earl, I hired him to do the editing. I said, Earl, you can bring as many editors on as you want. But the day that I stop shooting, the next day I have to have a completed, edited picture. So he kind of laughed and said, all right. And I think he hired 4 or 5 editors plus himself. I would go to the set, shoot all day. Then I would go to the editing room and I would check, give my approval to the edit done that day in the editing room. Then I would go home, sleep for maybe 3 or 4 hours, come back to the editing room, and he had started editing the stuff I had filmed the day before. I went back to the set, filmed for 12 hours, go back to the editing room, check what he had edited, approved it, went home, slept for anyhow. Long story short, 18 days later, plus one for the final edit, we had it, and we finished the picture. During the making of the picture, Menachem was never on the set to speak of. He came to me and he said, great, we've got Columbia Pictures. They're going to distribute the picture. I said, oh my God, that's great. Because that would have been my first picture distributed by a major studio. So we finished the picture. I'm home trying to recuperate. Menachem calls me. He says, Greydon, we have a screening at Columbia. You want to come? I said, of course. So I hopped in my car, rode to his office in Beverly Hills. Columbia at that time was in Burbank at Warner Studio. They were sharing it. So Menachem has a driver, and he and I get in a car, and we're driving over the hill from Beverly Hills to Warner Brothers, to Columbia. And he looked awful. He was sweating. He never looked very good. He was sweating, and he was stumbling with his words. I said, Menachem, what's wrong? He said, well, I didn't actually tell you the truth about Columbia. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've had this deal with Columbia on 4 pictures, and every time I screened a picture for them, they turned it down. I said, Menachem, I thought we had a deal at Columbia. No. I said, Menachem, you have a first look deal. You're going to allow them to look at the picture first. So we go over, we sit in the screening room. There's 4 or 5 Columbia executives there. Menachem introduces me, the director, so on. So I sat there and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, these people are used to looking at major studio stuff. How in the hell are they going to look at an 18-day movie with no stars in it? How are they going to make it? They're not going to accept this. So the screening ends, and we had not had the final shot frozen. And I stood up, and we were in front. I stood up, I turned to the executives, and I said, we're going to pick a freeze frame of the young guy and young girl dancing, and I elated at what has happened, that they've been on American television. And then we're going to have a subtitle over that freeze frame that says, this film is dedicated to the preservation of the rainforest. And I stopped and waited. And they started talking amongst themselves. And they said to Menachem, okay, we'll distribute it. Menachem was elated. We get in his car heading back to his office in Beverly Hills. I find out that he had a $3 million deal with Columbia that they had to pay him if they took the picture. Picture cost him less than $1 million. So I was his fair-haired guy. I just made him more than $2 million.
Yeah.
He paid me minimal amount. Anyhow. So picture goes out, does well. Columbia's happy. He's happy. I call him, wanted to see him about getting a videotape copy of The Lambada. I go to his office, and again, he looks depressed and awful. I says, what's wrong, Menachem? He said, oh, I just opened Phantom of the Opera. I distributed it myself with Robert Englund. I just lost over $1 million. It's terrible. I said, well, you win some, you lose some. He said, well, that's not the worst. I have a pay or play contract with Robert Englund for $500,000. I have to pay him to make a sequel to that. I'm not going to make a sequel to a picture I lost $1 million. I said, Menachem, pay or play means you've got to pay him. I mean, his agent, managers, and attorneys will come after you. You got to pay Robert Englund $500,000. He said, oh, what am I going to do? I said, well, listen, I'll write a script that Robert Englund will want to do, and a script that you will want to make, and we'll make it. He said, okay, can you make it in Romania? That's where they had made Phantom of the Opera with Robert Englund. I said, sure, I can do that. So I go and I start writing. He calls me. He says, Romania is out. This is like 3 weeks later. Romania is out. We're going to make it in, at that time it was called Leningrad, Russia. You up for it? I said, of course. Have passport, will travel. So so I start writing a script to take place in Leningrad, Russia. I don't know anything about Russia, but I did know a little bit about the ballet phenomenon in Russia, what an important thing it is in Russia. So I wrote a script around a ballet school in Russia that had just opened up to students from the West. But I had to have Robert Englund in it. That was the idea. So,
Right.
so I have a meeting with Robert Englund, his agent, and Macabre before I had written that script. And I said to Macabre before the Robert came, I said, listen, I have an idea about a ballet teacher. Robert can play the ballet teacher. And there's a woman who is killing the students because she's jealous. I said, but I don't know how it's going to work. I don't mention it to Robert. Just tell him that I'm working on the script. And Macabre says, okay. A few minutes later, in walks Robert Englund and his agent. How do you do? Macabre says, Greydon is writing a script with you as, it was a caretaker, not a manager at that time, became a manager. You play a caretaker, and there's a teacher, a Russian woman who kills people. And Robert, you play both of them. I'm sitting there saying, Macabre, I told you not to tell him anything about the script. Now you've just got me locked into having Robert Englund, a caretaker, and Robert Englund as a woman who is a teacher. So Robert stops and he says, well, I can do the Russian accent, but I don't think I can be a ballet teacher. I don't know anything about ballet. How would that work? Macabre says, Greydon will figure it out. So we say our goodbyes, and I turn to Macabre and say, Macabre, I told you not to tell him anything about it. He said, don't worry, just do it. So I go home. I start writing a script. I changed the caretaker to an impresario, an American impresario who had been living for some time in later it was changed. The city was changed to St. Petersburg versus Leningrad. So I'll refer to it now as St. Petersburg. So the guy had been in St. Petersburg for some time, and there is this woman who is the teacher. I said, however, flashback to Robert as a young man in New York City, a young teacher, a young ballerina there. They get into an automobile accident, and the ballerina is in a wheelchair. So therefore, Robert doesn't have to get up and dance as a ballerina because he's playing that part in heavy makeup as a woman. And she or he, the impresario, well, wait a minute. They're the same person, but nobody's supposed to know that, is killing off the ballerinas one by one. So I write the script. Macabre, as was his usual way, was traveling all over the world, never had looked at the script. So he wants to meet me in St. Petersburg. And he says, Greydon, bring the script. I'll read it there. So I did. I gave him the script. First night we got there in a hotel in St. Petersburg. He read the script. The next morning, I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, is he going to buy this or not? Next morning, I come down. We meet for breakfast. He says, Greydon, Robert Englund will kiss your ass to do this movie. We're going to do it. So
That's a
we
great
were
reaction.
on a scouting to see, to introduce me to the studio and to find locations, which we did. I come back to Los Angeles. Robert is given the script. He agrees to do it. And we made the movie. Then I go back to Los Angeles. My friend Earl, the editor, was cutting all the time. Excuse me. I'm there just a week or two. I'd been gone for 3 months. I'm there just a week or two. Menachem's right-hand man calls me and says, you got to come in to the office. Okay. I was going in almost every day to check on the editing anyhow. Ami was Menachem's right hand. He said, Greydon, they were making a film in Moscow, and they had been there shooting for 3 weeks and had less than 1 week done. They were way behind schedule. He says, Menachem wants you to go to Moscow and replace that director. So I said, what? Are there scripts? He said, yeah, there was to do 2 films. Are there scripts? Yes, we'll give you the script. So I took the script home. And I know you're not going to believe this because I don't believe it myself. I read script 1. It wasn't very good at all, but I could make some changes. I sat down, I started reading script 2, and it was the same goddamn script, just with a different name. When I say the same script, I'm talking about Xeroxed pages, identical. I said, I must have fallen asleep and picked that. No, there's the 2 scripts. Here's the Xerox pages. So I go in the next day to talk to Menachem, who is in North Carolina filming something. I said, first of all, I say to Menachem's aide, are you aware these are the same script? I mean, from about page 3 on, they're Xerox. They're absolutely identical. He said, no, that's impossible. I said, here they are. Look at them. Oh, my God. What's Menachem going to say? I said, did you read the script? No, I'd never read them. Did Menachem read? No, Menachem never read them. I said, somebody has conned somebody. This is ridiculous. I get Menachem on the phone. Menachem calls in. And I say, Menachem, there aren't 2 scripts. There's 1 script. He said, that's ridiculous. What's wrong with you, Greydon? I said, ask Ami, your buddy here. And Ami says, Menachem is right. There's no second script. He said, all right, Greydon, I want you to go over there, finish shooting the first, replace that guy. I'm firing. No, replace that guy, and then write a second script and do that. I said, Menachem, first of all, I don't want to replace another director. I just don't want to do that. He said, God damn it, Greydon, you're not replacing anybody. I fired him. He's gone. You're going. All right. So 3 or 4 days later, I went to Moscow and filmed Mad Dog Cole and did not film the second script because
there wasn't a second script.
I just didn't have time. I was making the first one and writing the second one, and I didn't. And so Menachem came over and he did the second script himself, directed it himself, and then I did 3 more pictures in Russia, my own pictures, and 1 in Bulgaria, then a couple of episodic television things, and decided I'm an old man, I'm going to retire, and I did.
Yeah, after quite a career.
Well, very lucky.
Yeah. So having seen decades of change in independent filmmaking and now apparently still paying attention to it with what you've been saying about people shooting things on iPhones and all that, I'm curious, what do you see as the future of independent filmmaking? What new things do you see happening in the coming years?
Well, there's no question that it will continue to be digital. That the days of film are gone, or sure on their last stages, and shortly. And distribution. You've explained that there are small distribution companies, which, frankly, I'd heard of but didn't know how they worked. But I think that more and more films will be made. Probably too many films will be made because the market is glutted I mean, there's, I don't know, a dozen different streaming services, and how much product can people watch? But there'll always be young, eager entrepreneurs who will want to make film, and I'm sure they will make great films. There'll still be the large screen IMAX type films that will cost in the future $1 billion to make, but will make 10 billion. So it's all relative. And, you know, I have a lot of faith that people will always want to watch something. They'll watch it on their iPhone, they'll watch it on their big screen televisions, and they'll watch it on the IMAX type stuff and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a optimistic view of the future. I like it.
Well, I am optimistic, and otherwise I wouldn't have started saying, "Oh, I can be an actor. What do actors do?" And get in my car and drive 2,000 miles with $50 in my pocket.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, if people want to read your book or purchase your movies, they can go to GreydonClark.com. If they want to stream your movies, there's a lot of them on Tubi and a bunch of other places as well. Is there anywhere else you would like to direct anyone listening to this?
No, that pretty well sums it up. I appreciate your conversation, and you've done a very, very good job with it.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for coming on and talking with me.
Okay, goodbye.